Kind of one of the things that's recently dawned on me is like you don't get paid on Twitter. Like you're adding a bunch of value for Twitter. Like Twitter, you're giving Twitter all of this valuable content and data that they're monetizing off of your hard work, and they're not giving you anything in return, really. I mean, you get these connections that you can't even leave Twitter with, and it's it makes sense. One thing I'm trying to communicate is that like Stacker.News values like a user's attention in a way that Twitter or Facebook doesn't. Like, we want to pay you for the attention that we're gaining, and so one of the things we're planning on doing with the job board, for instance, is a large portion of the money, if not all of it, that we make on the job board is going to go back to the users, because the users are what make the job board valuable to begin with. And so we take all of the stats that we get from companies that are posting jobs, and we just give it to the most trusted active users who are like actually driving attention on the site. And that's something that Lightning kind of allows us to do now.
Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to another episode of Changing the Tide. I'm your host, John Crabtree, and today I'm stoked to have Keyan Kousha on the show. He is the founder of Stacker.News. He's also one of the founders of Pleb Lab, which has turned into an accelerator for people building Bitcoin and Lightning companies down there in Austin. And so very excited to talk with him today about the growth of Stacker.News, his background in social media. We dive more deeply into how he's changing the tide, which is essentially returning control to the people, not only control, but monetary value back to the very people who create the value on social platforms in the first place, which are the users. And so that is one of the most exciting parts of our conversation about midway through the show. So let's get going. Welcome to the show, Keyan.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, I'm excited. We'll dive right into Clark Moody's Bitcoin dashboard real quick to go over some of the stats. We are at block height 725,459, and we have 90.34% of all Bitcoin that will ever be issued has already been issued to miners, so that's exciting. 14,886 reachable Bitcoin nodes, those that we know of, and about 52% are on Tor. Again, over the past couple weeks, the importance of Tor cannot be overstated. And then with the Lightning Network, we have 3,448.50 Bitcoin stashed away in Lightning Network, and about looks like 20,121 total nodes, with 76% of those on Tor as well. So exciting times. And Keyan, let's dive in, man. Tell us about Stacker.News. Like, I use it, but there might be people who are, I don't know, new to it and watching this. Give us the overview.
Yeah. So Stacker.News is a lot like Hacker News. If people are technical, they've probably been introduced to Hacker News. It was kind of this website that was created around the time Reddit was created, but it was meant to be a little more technical, a little more in depth, and a little more like intellectually focused rather than kind of meme culturally focused. It was created by Paul Graham, who was the founder of Y Combinator. But that was kind of the genesis of Stacker News. Is I wanted a Hacker News, but I wanted it about Bitcoin. I wanted to really be able to learn more about Bitcoin and get like the best kind of highest signal stuff that's going on in Bitcoin and like concentrate it in one place rather than scouring over Twitter or Reddit, where again Reddit's culture is maybe a little bit different and not conducive to something fairly technical and sophisticated like Bitcoin. But yeah, it's like Hacker News, only we use Bitcoin in any possible way that like kind of makes sense. So the initial version of Stacker News, it was just a little bit of civil resistance. So like a little bit of DOS prevention, a little bit of in terms of like or sock puppet attacks. So it would cost 1 sat to upvote things. It would cost 1 sat to post, 1 sat to comment. And that was just like from day one, that was kind of the design. And then from there, we've been gradually integrating more and more kind of Lightning and which uses Bitcoin into the site. So now you can like tip users a little more freely. You can do things like boosting your post to have it rank higher. We're doing interesting things we just launched a job board today or yesterday.
Congrats.
Yeah. Which uses Lightning, attempts to use Lightning in kind of an interesting way to provide like a novel job board where jobs to post are very cheap, but in terms of like competing, in terms of like the ranking, it might get a little more expensive. Like it's kind of like this market-based mechanism to increase the visibility of your job potentially, and that streams sats from your wallet on like a minute by minute basis, so you can like terminate and end your job. Like you can terminate your job and start your job, and there's no prorating or anything needs to happen. It's just kind of it's like very flexible. It's a bit that's kind of the goal, is that I feel like we have a really efficient payment mechanism, and so we can do really interesting things with payments, perhaps.
I saw it was like 230 millisats per minute or something is how it's streamed. Is that right?
Yeah. It's so I tried to make it like fairly intuitive, and so the idea was I'd give the job poster like a monthly rate. This is how many sats it'll cost you a month, but it's actually billed on a per minute basis. So if your job post, if you're paying 10,000 sats per month for your job post, then divided by 30 divided by 24 divided by 60 ends up being 230 millisats. So that's kind of the idea, because a user's wallet on Stacker.News is denominated in millisats, even though it really only shows sats, because millisats are like even lower value than a sat.
Two more decimal places. That's the millisat piece, right? There's two more no.
It's a millisat is 1/1000th of a sat. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, gotcha. Three extra
more. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was once instructed, interestingly enough, by Adam Back on Twitter that you can subdivide a sat. So that was cool. But that's awesome.
I don't think it does. Yeah, you can't subdivide a sat on chain, as far as I understand.
That's right. He was talking specifically to the Lightning Network, and even then, it doesn't really show up. Like you can, I don't know. I'm not too technical, but
yeah. It's kind of it's kind of something you establish within the Lightning Network, that you can divide a sat up in pieces, but if you have like only 500 millisats, there's no really claiming that on chain unless it accumulates into something, into a sat eventually.
That's it. Yes, that sounds like exactly what he said. It's kind of like the old pieces of 8 with silver, except you can't trade them, but you can on the Lightning Network. Anyway, that's the cool thing about Lightning is there's just so much to learn.
Yeah, it's an endless pit of cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, okay, so jobs. One other thing that I thought was interesting is that algorithm, and I think you touched on it a little bit there, where you can basically, it's a market mechanism. Could you maybe just explain that a little bit more? Because this is pretty new to Stacker.News, right? That type of algorithm for the jobs.
Yeah. So that was just, I just launched it yesterday. The main feed, like the news feed, it's kind of a standard sort of algorithm. Like it has, like users upvote it, and there's like kind of a time-based decay. So if a post is more recent and it gets upvotes, it'll rank higher than a post with a similar number of upvotes that's older. And so this is kind of this exponential decay on things that are on the front page. That way, things that are on the front page are kind of regularly changing, yet the higher signal things are kind of there given a certain time period. And it's a little more. There's a little more involved in that, because we do something interesting with this thing called Web of Trust to like determine whether a user is trustworthy. But that's kind of the fundamental basis of that. But I think what's kind of cool about Lightning is we can do a lot more interesting. You can do economic-based ranking, and this is kind of, the jobs board is an experiment in that, where a job poster would put in their maximum bid, and let's say it's 11,000 sats, and their job posting will rank higher than someone whose bid is 10,000 sats. And if someone comes along and puts a maximum bid of 12,000 sats, then that person with 12,000 sats, their job will rank higher than the person with 11,000 sats. And and then another poster can come along maybe, and they'll say they want 50,000 sats, and they'll sit at the top, yet they'll only pay 13,000 sats. They're just putting that maximum bid in anticipation of someone potentially coming along and trying to bid more than them. And that's kind of the way it works. It's very novel. So it's it might need tweaking, and I think the UX and explanations around the algorithm could probably use work too. But the idea was just to get it out there and get feedback, which I'm already getting, and it seems to be at the very least interesting to people, and I hope that I can refine it so that it actually like makes sense and if people find it appealing.
Because there are solutions out there, or I guess at least job postings for Bitcoiners specifically, like Bitcoiner jobs, for instance.
Oh yeah.
And this is another area where, especially on the technical side, because Stacker.News tends to trend towards the technical side, that it could be super helpful for essentially any technical role in Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think the value of our job board might be that we already have like 10,000 unique visitors a month on the page, and so if an employer wants to get access to the people that find Stacker.News' content interesting, which might be more technical people, then that would be the appeal. And then they have a little more control over their job posts than they would on Bitcoiner jobs in terms of where it sits. So like Bitcoiner jobs is, well, I love Bitcoiner jobs. For a long time, Bitcoiner jobs was in my nav bar. I would link to it in the Stacker.News nav bar. That's where the jobs went originally. Now it goes to our job board. But it's like a traditional job board in the sense that to rank higher, you have to have recently posted your job. That's the way it's ranked. It's ranked based on time. So if your job is recent, it's at the top. If it's not, then it's buried somewhere, and someone might not see it. And then I think they might also have some like ability to promote them, but I don't know on what basis they promote them, because I think it is the job board is free. They're doing it like pro bono just for Bitcoin companies, and so you're kind of maybe you can communicate with the people that run the job board, and they'll post your job in the promotional area, or maybe you pay them. I don't exactly know how that works, but those are the main differences. We have a user base that might be a little more focused, that'll be accessing the job board, and then the ranking mechanism is kind of novel.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so Keyan, I did a little bit of research and found that this is not your first foray into just social media in general. It actually, I've seen at least two of yours, one that goes all the way back to college. Can you tell us about UC Davis Confessions? That seems so interesting.
Oh, okay. You found that. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you remember around this period of time. This was like 2012 on Facebook. All of these like confessions pages popped up. They were very popular on college campuses. Do you remember those?
Yep.
Yeah. But so UC Davis had one, and it was a confessions page, and it got really popular. I think it had like thousands of people following this page. And what they would do is they'd have a Google form that you could submit like a confession into, and then someone would manually take that and post it back into the Facebook page. And so it required this manual process of someone just like reading all these confessions, copy and pasting them onto the Facebook page. And I was like, that seems so tedious, and we have to trust and depend on this person, and they'll be around and they'll be willing to post my content in there. And so I was like, I wanted to learn Ruby on Rails too. So I was like, this would be a great like little toy to learn Ruby on Rails. So I just built a little toy that basically automated this process. People could visit my website. It was like ucdavisconfessionsplus.com or something. And it was just a little form, and they'd submit their thing, and then it would automatically post it to the Facebook page. And that was basically the idea. And that got actually pretty popular. Like people liked it. I think I made a mistake in like naming it too similarly because called it UC Davis Confessions Plus, but we had like thousands of people regularly using it. And then we added other things like anonymous comments to it, where you'd get like a Harry Potter, a Lord of the Rings character name, and we like store a session variable so that you can maintain within each comment thread, you maintained your identity within the Facebook page. Then we got we occasionally got trolls and things on there, so we started doing really like kind of interesting things by like we had like a name recognizer to determine like, are you using someone's like actual name in this post? That's probably not good. So we block it out. We had like a blacklist of words that would get us like perhaps reported to Facebook. We got so many strikes on that page. It was kind of a nightmare to manage.
Yeah.
But it was a fun little experiment, and it served as like a way to promote other projects that I was working on at the time. Like my first that was like not a startup, but like my first startup, we used that confessions page to get people to use that first startup, and I actually ended up meeting my wife by virtue of she was a user of that confessions page, then she was a user of my first startup, then we met in a focus group I had for that first startup. But yeah, it was like a fun little project that was kind of, perhaps it was more popular than my startup was, which failed miserably. But it was like that page was pretty popular.
And that highlights the importance of shipping, because you never know what's going to happen after you ship, right?
Yep.
You might meet your wife. No,
it's true. Yeah, there's no amount. I mean, being intelligent helps quite a bit in terms of predicting what people want, but it's still like life is so messy, and like humans and our connections and their desires are so messy that you really can't predict very reliably what they want. So it's a combination of thinking very deeply about what people want, and then also just doing a lot, like just shipping like crazy and trying to reaching for what you think they might want and hoping that one of those hits.
That's great advice. And then there was a second, I believe you were working right before Stacker.News. Was it on some sort of Pinterest style site for like the medical profession?
Yeah, that site is still live, and it actually generates revenue in terms of ads. But it's a Pinterest for doctors. So I met a friend of mine, Gerald, who is an internist, and he's like, I do this. He's like, I want a product that does what I do but better. Like he had this manual process if he'd go to a conference or something, and then there'd be a presentation, and they'd have like slides that he would find really useful and he'd want to reference later. So he would take a picture of the slide, he'd store it in some app he was using on his phone, and then he'd associate it with a bunch of hashtags in his phone so that he could quickly find it later when he's in the hospital and trying to like recall all this information. Internists, critical care doctors, certain medical fields, they're responsible for like a very wide breadth of knowledge, and just it doesn't stick in the brain terribly well. And particularly if you're like a resident and you haven't seen like these cases a million times, and guidelines do change, even though not very frequently. So we created a site where, and then also additionally on social media, a lot of doctors, they're in these fields, they're sharing these like infographic summaries of a research paper or something, or a chart of like dosages for certain medications and the side effects and things like that. And so we basically created a place for these to live and made it easily searchable. And then we kind of fell into this like SEO niche where we get like we have like 300,000 people on the site a month, just from Google SEO, because so many doctors are using Google image search for just to find these kinds of images. And yeah, that was a fun project that we did really part time, and it generated a bit of revenue, but we never really dedicated full time to it. And then I just when I went to BitDevs here in Austin after I moved here, I just wanted to focus exclusively on Bitcoin stuff, and so that's what I've been doing since.
That's cool. And so, was there anything like the guardrails you put on UC Davis Confessions Plus? What kind of guardrails did you work on for this Pinterest site? Because I can imagine if you have residents, internists going and trying to see these documents, you want to make sure they're accurate, right? Like,
right. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, there's not that community isn't, has a high barrier to entry in just terms of interest. So there aren't a lot of people that are visiting that site that have malintent. So a manual moderation process is like sufficient in that case. You're like not trying to appeal to everyone, and you do want some form of editorial process. But we have like ranking and search that's based on how many other users have liked it, how many other users have bookmarked it. So if something is like low quality, it just kind of won't be seen. We do have issues with spam. Like we'll get occasionally like an escort service will find it and they'll try to post some stuff to it, but we just delete them, and it's fairly functional. Like it just with some moderation and human intervention.
That makes sense. Yeah, in that particular context, the high barrier to entry to become a resident. That's sufficient to deter. Okay, so then you mentioned Web of Trust. Now back to Stacker.News. Tell us about Web of Trust, because learning more about that blew my mind first and foremost. And then with Stacker.News, it sounds like what it's doing is allowing for individuals to show up and see content, I guess, either directly or indirectly, see content that's more relevant to them.
Yeah. So how Web of Trust works is, so like I have a relationship with you on the site. Like I infer a relationship between users based on how many upvotes, like I'd say I've given you. And so if I give you more upvotes, that means I trust you more. And then that trust relationship, I express it as on a range of like 0 to like 0.9. And so the maximally I can trust you 90%. And then if you John, you have a relationship with Bob, then I can and say that's also 0.9. And so I trust you 0.9, and then you trust Bob 0.9. That means I'll trust the relationship, the amount I trust Bob is no transitive. So I can just multiply how much I trust you by how much you trust Bob, and that's how much I trust Bob. So I'll trust Bob 0.81. And so you have this graph of these kind of relationships. And then so I can determine who's trustworthy on the site. So if Alice shows up and Alice hasn't interacted with anyone, hasn't posted any content, we have no basis of whether we should trust Alice's judgment on the site, like whether her upvotes mean anything. Like she might be just a sock puppet account created by Bob, say. And so she could just come and upvote Bob could be trying to upvote his own stuff and getting it to rank higher. And so you see mechanisms on sites like Reddit and Hacker News to defend against these things. And they're usually like these kind of absolute measures where it's like, how long has this person been on the site? How much karma do they have? And so Web of Trust is kind of a new way of tackling the problem that they were trying to solve, but it's more like relative and flexible in a way that not only is there only one there's like only one Web of Trust, but eventually, this is the way it works right now. Is there is on Stacker.News there is only one Web of Trust, but eventually John will have his own Web of Trust, and his feed will be independent of mine, because you'll trust people differently than I do, and that's just kind of the way humans naturally are. Like we all kind of form our own cliques, and we have our own biases and things that we kind of want to see. And what's nice about that, it's you're kind of picking and choosing what you want to see, and it is, while it's similar, it's different than kind of like what an engagement algorithm would do on something like Twitter or Facebook, where they're not trying to establish how much you trust a user, or they're trying to establish how emotionally involved you get in a particular topic or post or whatever. And so it's interesting, and it'll be a flavor of novelty that we can layer on Stacker.News that differs from Reddit, because Reddit right now it's a commons. The front page of Reddit, or the front page of any sub is a commons. And it suffers the tragedy of that, and they have a bunch of mechanisms to try to solve it. But private property just scales so much better, and so your front page on Stacker.News will eventually be your private property that you're kind of cultivating. You're kind of cultivating this web of trust that will allow you to see things that you kind of want to see. And that's the kind of idea there.
So the idea is more data ownership for the actual person who joined Stacker.News, like each individual.
Yeah, more control, I guess. More control over what they're seeing, and they aren't forced to share a resource with other users who might be trying to abuse the resource that they're sharing. So they don't have to trust other users. They only trusting the users that they're choosing to trust. They don't choose everyone that possibly shows up.
That's really cool. And so then you layer in the fact that the underlying currency of Stacker.News is Bitcoin on Lightning Network, and upvotes. You talked about the concept of upvotes. On Stacker.News, the upvote is sending sats. Is that correct?
Yeah. You can you send it. Every upvote is at least a sat. Some users configure their upvotes to give the user more sat, but you're transferring value to another user when you upvote their content. So like your karma on Reddit, where it's just kind of on Reddit where your karma matters. On Stacker.News, you're actually getting money. Like your karma is, you can withdraw it from Stacker.News and go spend it on a coffee or a beer or whatever. Like it's meaningful. It's valuable outside of the context of Stacker.News.
Yeah, like I could load it up on Breeze or Fountain and stream it to a podcaster that I listen to as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully
that's the benefit of using. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I cut you off.
No, it's cool. I was just going to say that's like we have like this very efficient payment mechanism that we can just it can go anywhere very easily, and it's just really cool that you can kind of unleash money in this way, and very small amounts become feasible to send cheaply. It's really cool. I'm looking forward to what things people are going to build with that.
Yeah. Now, what is the most amount of sats that has been sent to a creator on Stacker.News? Do you have the analytics on that?
Yeah, you can go to top on Stacker.News, and I'll check right now. But you can see the user who has stacked the most is Durgigi. So he did an AMA, like he was one of the first AMAs on Stacker.News, and he stacked mostly in that AMA, 102,000 sats. So
wow.
At the time, I think that was like $60 or $70. Now, with a little bit of volatility, we're a little bit lower. But yeah, that was the most he stacked, and that was when Stacker.News was quite a bit younger. Odell's the next second one who recently did an AMA, and he made about 80,000. People seem to like Gigi more than Odell. Is that, or they want to give Gigi more money than they want to give Odell. But Yeah, so you can imagine that scales up maybe in the future. Maybe, if you look on Reddit's front page, the upvotes of a top post that'll be on Reddit's front page is something like 20,000 to or more upvotes. And so, that user, that same post on Stacker.News, assuming we have this similar, like eventually a similar size user base, could be $10. Someone got $10 for posting this piece of content, and so potentially there's like actual, you can get a bill paid or something by your usage on social media. It's kind of one of the things that's recently dawned on me is like you don't get paid on Twitter. Like you're adding a bunch of value for Twitter. Like Twitter, you're giving Twitter all of this valuable content and data that they're monetizing off of your hard work, and they're not giving you anything in return, really. I mean, you get these connections that you can't even leave Twitter with, and it's it makes sense. Like one thing I'm trying to communicate is that like Stacker.News values like a user's attention in a way that Twitter or Facebook doesn't. Like we want to pay you for the attention that we're gaining. And so one of the things we're planning on doing with the job board, for instance, is all like a large portion of the money, if not all of it, that we make on the job board is going to go back to the users, because the users are what make the job board valuable to begin with. And so we take all of the stats that we get from companies that are posting jobs and we just give it to the most trusted active users who are like actually driving attention on the site. And that's something that Lightning kind of allows us to do now.
Wow, there's so much there, because in our attention economy, the thing that unlocks you being paid for your attention is the Lightning Network. And actually an organization like Stacker.News, or a site that is not paying that back to shareholders, it's paying it back to the user community, who I guess in a sense are the shareholders in a way. Not that you're,
Yeah.
but the idea is like, I'm a user, you value me enough to say, okay, if you've used it enough, if people trust you, you gain some of that. It's almost value for value, but not in the podcasting 2.0 space, on the like social media space.
Yeah. I think it really is. I think there's something really there. I think users do back to the shareholder idea. I think that is really what Web3 is. Is like Web3 is money is now digital. Like money is now efficient to send around the internet, and while in kind of like the traditional view of Web3, it's you own an NFT, which is like kind of a receipt for a receipt for something that you can maybe use to access certain resources, and you can like accrue value in some way. Like I think the real thing that's happening is that users, it's very easy to give users value back proportional to their input. Like it's very easy to transmit money to them, value to them, for their efforts. And I think that's the real Web3 is unlocking the efficiency around payments such that small efforts by users can be still compensated.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to think, like, I've had people stream sats to my podcast on Fountain. I've had people send me thousands. I've had people send me like 9 sats for like a minute, and, and in the context, it's like, okay, that's great. You found value out of it. And that value is subjective to them, of what they got. I think they listened to like my first minute with one of my previous guests, and it was like, all right, you found at least that minute valuable. I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really curious how the value for value podcasting space will evolve too, because I know there are tons of like these Patreon podcasts where they kind of gate their podcasts behind like kind of a paywall, and they like half release them out in the open and half don't. I'd like to see a little more like flexibility around like maybe I get 30 minutes into a podcast and now there's like a sat barrier that I need to pay to get to the other half of it or something. Like I think we can do like really flexible kind of things in a way that you can't do where you need to like collect a credit card payment that's only like feasible given the fees to bill them once a month or whatever. Like there's a lot more interesting things we can do. Whether users like want that, I don't know, but like there's the possibilities are there.
The possibilities are definitely there, and I think people are waking up to, I don't want this constant recurring charge on my credit or debit card, right? I want to be able to right there in the minute, I'll give stats for the next 20 minutes. I've already listened to a half hour. It's just so easy. Like on Stacker.News, it's so easy to send a stat to someone, or 10 or 50. And then over time, the user has accrued all this, if it's kind of like a daily habit to go to Stacker.News, post, send stats to others, and you receive it as well. It's its own economy. It's insane. It's blowing my mind.
Yeah, it is. It is like these miniature economies, these like micro economies, and I think they'll grow as like usage of these systems grow. They'll become like more meaningful economies. But all of the kind of structure of an economy is already present there. Like all of the incentives that are present in a normal economy are there, even if like the units are like tinier, the value transmissions are tinier. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, the idea of peer-to-peer transactions is just, that is the economy. An economy is a amassed collection of peer-to-peer transactions. It's just we've always had middlemen in between in the digital age, and now we don't, or we don't need them.
We don't. Yeah, we don't need them anymore, and it's just like figuring out the UX that people are comfortable with, and then maybe some of the like getting people's minds to change about what kind of what money is, and that it's actually this kind of ledger is really what money is. And I think if like one, and it's gradually permeating for people, but I think once we get there, these things are going to become the common way we transact. I commonly think about my like TV consumption. So I really like fictional television shows, but there are like so many different streaming services now, and I just want access to like this one show, and then I'll subscribe to like HBO Max to get access to the show, and then what I'll do is I'll subscribe to it, and then I'll immediately go and cancel it in my settings so that it doesn't set up this like recurring thing. But if I could. And then sometimes maybe I thought I wanted that show, but I don't. It ended up actually being kind of bad, and I want to bail out. And so it'd be kind of interesting if we could do more of this kind of thing for like an HBO Max, where if I complete an episode, I'm paying what maybe that episode should cost, rather than paying for a bunch of content that I don't want to see.
What's interesting there is like it'll probably be a long time before we see a company as large as an HBO Max or like a Disney Plus. Well, maybe not. They might adopt Bitcoin faster than we think, gradually than suddenly, but they might not. But there might be studios that are not around now that, let's say in 3 to 5 years, have grown immensely because they started with Bitcoin. Like they started creating content and accepting streaming Bitcoin or Bitcoin payments. That's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, you could certainly imagine that happening, and I think as time passes, it becomes more and more likely to occur, and like more and more clear that it will. How far away are we? Because the problem is you have to like time, because it's like it is a two-sided type of arrangement, media production. You have to your consumers have to also want to transact with Bitcoin if you want to receive it. So you really have to, you want to be there when the users are ready, for it. And like when that'll be the case, I don't know. I think a lot of people are still more comfortable with like the traditional fiat payments, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I focused Stacker.News so heavily on Bitcoiners and kind of the technical community, because I knew they were ready for this type of experience in a way that like a general Reddit community wouldn't be at all. And so you kind of have to, you want to fit your product to whatever market is ready for it. And I don't know if like big, you big production value media content is ready yet, but I certainly see more opportunity for certainly Bitcoiners who have a Bitcoin based audience to be doing more of this stuff. It doesn't kind of make sense that they might use a Patreon or something when they could either get tools built or use tools that other people are providing to make money.
Yeah, that two-sided piece, being ready for when the market is ready. I guess that's something we can get really excited about. The future of Bitcoin and try to accelerate it now. But there's an adoption curve for sure.
Yeah, you can't force the market.
Yeah. Is that part of the reason, going back to, you mentioned moving to Austin and going to BitDevs, was the growing, burgeoning Austin Bitcoin community part of just what like captured your attention and made you want to start something like Stacker.News, or were you into Bitcoin before that, Keyan? What was that like?
Yeah, I was into Bitcoin before. I wasn't as we always want to be earlier into Bitcoin than we are, but I got into it earlier, and then so I was like heavily focused on Bitcoin. And one of the reasons I moved to Austin was because I knew the Bitcoin community here was great. I also loved Austin when like we like did city shopping around the United States, and we came to Austin and we just had a great time. And then coupled with the fact that there were a bunch of Bitcoiners here, it was like an obvious choice to move here. But I went to one of the first things I did when I moved here is I went to this BitDevs, and it was just like, it felt like there was just such high signal there, not just about Bitcoin, but about like meaningful change happening, like that these people really cared about like humanity, in my opinion, and also and wanted to do something to improve it, and really felt like they were, and it mirrored to me, a lot of the like history and television shows that I've watched about like early internet history. So one thing I've said on like several podcasts at this point is that it felt like I was in an episode of *Halt and Catch Fire*, which is this AMC show that was this. It was a fictional show about the early PC era, the early internet era, and I just felt at those BitDevs meetup, I felt like I was in like that show a little bit in terms of like just the cast of characters, their attitudes. And so that was very like high signal to me that I should be working in Bitcoin. And then also it made it very approachable that I was surrounded by flesh and blood humans who were working on Bitcoin. It made it seem like I could do it too. Even it felt like I had like a little bit of a barrier to feeling like I was like worthy of working in the space before I had gone to my first BitDevs.
And so meeting these people, it was like, oh yeah, there are others working on it, and we're doing this together, and we're doing it for meaningful change and humanity.
Yeah, we're bringing something that'll change people's lives to the world, and we're like communing around how do we get this thing out there. It's so packed with like meaning and intent and purpose. It's like hard not to just like get enraptured by that. Like John Vallis talks like is it really tries. He's kind of fixated on this idea, like what is it about Bitcoin that is changing people's lives and making them kind of overhaul their lives in a way that feels very similar to like a religious experience. And I'm personally not sure what it is. Like, I don't think I have like the depth of knowledge that would allow me to see what that is. But there is something certainly there, um, that makes Bitcoin special.
Maybe it's the magnitude of what we know Bitcoin stands against potentially, and that probably plays a part in that.
Yeah, I think what it stands against, what it's capable of doing. But I mean, I struggle for words to describe it. It's kind of like attempting to describe consciousness. It's like it just feels like like my brain feels empty when I try. You like know it's this thing and it exists and you can kind of witness it happening, but in terms of like defining it, you become it's just kind of it's a little bit flabbergasting. And maybe the answer is simple, and like we're just searching for something bigger, and that's why it feels like it's hard to describe. But it feels magical, at least, is what I'd say.
Yeah. Memes aside, the idea of a magical internet money in and of itself really kind of splits people into two camps, I think. So those who say that's rubbish, that's stupid, what do you mean by that? And those who say, whoa, if that's really real, then it means it opens up this whole new world. So, okay, so going back to Austin, and you are based at Pleb Lab, right? Is that where Stacker.News currently is working out of?
Yeah, yeah. So we
Were
have a
you?
group of. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, were you one of the co-founders of Pleb Lab, or just one of the early entrants?
Yeah, yeah. I can tell you the story of Pub Lab. I started working out of Capital Factory like uh, last summer, and then shortly after that, two Bitcoiners kind of joined me in Capital Factory. For they were looking for a place to host Austin Bitcoin Club, which is like a not it's like a less technical Bitcoin meetup in Austin than BitDevs. And so they started working out at Capital Factory too, and it was really cool to have like other Bitcoiners I could talk to every day on a regular basis. And so my like time at Capital Factory was ending because I had won like this free membership for 3 months there, and so that was ending, and we were like, oh no, we're gonna miss out on this what we find is this valuable experience of like convening with Bitcoiners on a daily basis and working with them. And so we decided to try to not let it end, and that kind of led to Pleb Lab, which is it kind of started out just all like us like forming together to form a small group of Bitcoiners working together. So we got a bunch more people to work with us. But that's kind of evolved. Like a lot of those people that wanted to join us, they're starting their own companies. They need help, kind of doing I don't know, a lot of the boilerplate that's required for a startup, like, you got to form a legal entity, you got to find investors, you have to kind of, what a lot of founders are quite green, and they haven't, maybe failed enough times to really understand what they're doing yet. And so we're kind of Pleb Lab, which is like kind of this communal thing, is it's turning into an accelerator. Like we're building now an accelerator for Bitcoin. Something that hasn't really been built in Bitcoin yet, but I think is really needed. We find so much value just being around each other. Like some of us are solo founders, and so the emotional support is huge. Like in technical support, we have some like free open source developers who are also working with us in the space. Bitcoiners who have jobs at Bitcoin companies and have their own like technical niches that they can kind of help you understand if you have any questions. Um, yeah, it's just community. It's just like community and like this network and this tight knit this tight knit group who share this kind of mission with Bitcoin. We're like bringing them together and trying to um, join forces to bring more Bitcoin stuff to the world.
That's really cool. The network effect of like getting
Yeah.
like-minded Bitcoiners who are super enthusiastic about the technology and putting them all together in one place. I'm excited to see. I mean, we already have. Did Oshi app come out of Pleb Lab, or was that separate?
Yeah, Oshi's in Pleb Lab. It started before Pleb Lab, but Michael joined here, and he's in Pleb Lab. Lightning Escrow from Tristan and Super Testnet, which is a cool Lightning project.
He was
We
just
have a
on
couple more
SNL.
Moonbase. Yeah, just on SNL, Super
Okay,
Testnet. Yeah, yeah.
cool.
Yeah, he's great. He had been working on HODL contracts for a long time, which uses this HODL invoice mechanism where kind of an intermediate node between two peers in the Lightning Network can kind of freeze a payment and not let it transfer. And so he built an escrow mechanism out of that, where it's like non-custodial in terms like you don't really have to trust the escrow. They can't unilaterally run away with your funds. Um, but yeah, but it uses the Lightning Network, so it's a really cool thing. We have Moonbase 5. They recently joined Pleb Lab. They're trying to do like kind of Bitcoin layaway. Um, Husinki, the founder of Husinki, Sam, is in Pleb Lab. They're an Bitcoin infrastructure company that's currently kind of stealthy. John
I
from
had to.
Zapright. Yeah.
I had Cal Casa from. I think he's part of that team as well on session
Yeah, he
four of
works
the
at,
show.
yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah, Cal is great. Another Austin Bitcoiner. And yeah, he's at Helsinki now. Yeah, we're trying to get as many people here as possible. So like if I hear someone's like released a Bitcoin product, I'll be like, hey, move to Austin, please. But we try to do anything we can to help them regardless of where they are. Just because the community is so small and every connection is very valuable and means a lot more than I think in other communities.
Yeah. Um, I know that I think Kyle Murphy is one of the others who started up Pleb Lab, and reading from his Twitter, it's like his thing is we're going to make Austin a Bitcoin citadel, and people are going to use Bitcoin in Austin. So you guys are going to become the gravitational star of Bitcoin, at least in the U.S. Um, but
That's the
I don't
goal.
see. Yeah, I don't see anywhere else using it as much, quite as much, or building on it as much. There are pockets, but um, nothing like Austin, at least that I've seen so far. Unless you're aware of
No,
something.
no. I mean, there are probably more populated areas like the Bay Area that maybe have more Bitcoiners across the entire Bay Area. But like in terms of like per capita interest, I would say Austin probably has the highest concentration of Bitcoiners that I've witnessed at least. New York maybe too has quite a few Bitcoiners, but similarly, it's like diluted by people who have no interest at all. There's like uniquely quite a few Bitcoiners here. I don't know any place that has 200 or more people showing up to a monthly meetup.
The density is high there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you just released Jobs. Back to Stacker News. You just released Jobs. What's next for Stacker News over the next month or two? Anything you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, the next couple of months are probably going to be going back to refining core features, like making sure the site is operating fast and like two users reported a bug today where like you can't log in with the email currently, like it just broke for some reason. So like all of these things.
Whoops.
So when you're moving fast, things tend to break, and so refining all of that experience and not trying to go heavy on like introducing new features and just enhancing existing stuff is probably what I'll be doing. But we want to do like a lot of users are asking for like being able to post video and images, those kinds of things I can easily tack on. Jimmy Song asked for polls. He wants to be able to know what the Bitcoin community thinks about something, and it's very easy. It's much easier to do that to reach Bitcoiners on Stacker News than it would be on Twitter, obviously, because there are so many people that aren't Bitcoiners on there, and we could also make the polls like civil resistant. So polls, speed stuff. Those are just kind of the kind of general refinements and features around the core like social experience. Oh, DMs are another thing. So we want like sat barrier DMs, like where if I'm Jimmy Song and I'm on Stacker News, I don't want anyone to be able to DM me. I want them like in order to send me a DM, maybe I want it to cost 5,000 sats to send me a DM to initiate a conversation with me, and maybe I can refund that 5,000 sats if I'm like, oh, this person is cool, I want to talk to them. But maybe they're not, and I want them to every message I want them to continue having to pay me for every message they send me, so that you get value for your attention that you're paying them. So that's another thing we want to do, and then kind of longer further out is really decentralizing the site so that you aren't that Stacker News, you're no longer dependent on Stacker News centrally. It's now an app you run on Umbrel, and it kind of exists in the world independent of me or anyone else, and it just kind of runs, and then you have the freedom that's associated like that you have with Bitcoin to some degree, where you have censorship resistance. No one can take your posts down if maybe a government doesn't like them in your country or whatever. Or, you have more control over your privacy because all the code that's running, and you're controlling all of it. So that's kind of the general direction we're going. More like there'll be more experiments with subs, maybe different ranking mechanisms. Maybe we do like a product hunt type of sub. Maybe we do a general classified sub where people can just kind of post things and they can pay more or less to get higher ranking there, kind of like with jobs. Maybe topic subs will eventually come when the community's larger. But there's like so much surface area. It's really hard to get, or it's really it's very easy to get distracted, and so I think just going like I'm constantly reminding myself I just need to go back and focus on the core user experience, and that's what I'll be doing.
That's great. Yeah. So going back to those things, one of the ideas that you just discussed was like making it your own instance, essentially, like your own instance of Stacker News. You know the code. People can't take your posts down. Now you're there are a couple others out there that are doing, let's say, messaging via the Lightning Network in trying to utilize kind of the data like the random data transfer capabilities of Lightning Network. So is that kind of what you're talking about, or is it slightly different than say what like maybe a Sphinx or Zion are doing?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. My understanding of the Sphinx chat model is especially like when there's a group, it's still dependent on one node kind of staying up and existing. So like while you're in control of that, the person who creates that group is in control of that Sphinx tribe, and they can perhaps migrate that tribe around to other nodes, but it doesn't exist. As far as I understand, it doesn't exist simultaneously on multiple people's nodes. Like if I'm hosting a Sphinx group and then I terminate the node that it was running on, it's gone. You're like trusting me to keep it up for you, and so that would be kind of the difference. I would say, well, what I'm intending, like how I'm intending to decentralize Stacker News is different than that. It's also different than something like Mastodon, which is this kind of federated model where you still have like some degree of centralization, but there's like you can synchronize that kind of around. But you aren't really, as far as I understand, you're not running your own Mastodon instance at home, and it and there it's kind of not very generic. It just the model doesn't seem to. It's not really open peer to peer. It's more this federated. There are like several centralized locations that you can kind of go for Mastodon things. But it is more, I would say, censorship resistant than, or less centralized than something like a Sphinx chat, which you are trusting to kind of you're trusting whoever is joining the tribe, not for your own messaging. So you're not dependent on a centralized party for you to message a variety of people. You're only having to trust yourself. But in terms of like the tribe or the shared areas, it's kind of centralized. It'd be more like Nostr. So Nostr is kind of this new protocol, or not really new. It's been, I think, Fiat Joff has been working on it for about a year. But it's more like a relay network, and so you can just kind of send data around to a variety of nodes, and it's this kind of simple, very simple protocol for doing that. And that's kind of more of the way we intend for Stacker.News to be decentralized is an open peer-to-peer network, uh, quite a bit more like Bitcoin in that way, in terms of anyone can run a node, and then when you broadcast a message, it kind of floods the network and gets eventually to everyone's node. And those nodes can have their own policies in terms of like what posts they allow and what subs they want to be subscribed to or whatever. But that's kind of the general idea. Is it's like open peer to peer. There isn't really anywhere necessarily that's centralized unless someone wants to provide that. Maybe Stacker News, a centralized site, still exists for UX reasons. Maybe there aren't users who want to deal with having to run their own thing, but that's kind of the general idea. I haven't flushed out the design of that terribly well yet, but there are tons of like open ideas around how you make something like that exist and incentivize it, and perhaps we even like use Nostr to do that, because it is just a very simple protocol that is easy to describe any type of data in.
Wow. That's an ambitious vision. But
Yeah, that's the
very
hope.
cool.
Yeah.
The Jimmy Song thing, interesting enough, reminds me of, it was maybe a couple weeks after Satoshi released version 1 of Bitcoin, but there was an email exchange where Satoshi talked, and I think it was with Dustin Trammell, but it was about like imagine email where you have to pay for someone to read your email, and even if you don't, even if they don't read the email, they can keep your Bitcoin. And so that DM concept is very much, I think, borrowing from that initial exchange.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of I mean one of the like core foundational ideas behind Bitcoin was Hashcash, this thing created by Adam Back before Bitcoin existed, and the idea was to make it expensive for someone to send lots and lots of mail to spam email. And what you kind of have with Bitcoin is you kind of have this tokenized hashing, this tokenized energy, this tokenized like effort or value that someone's created. And so, rather than sending or rather than doing, hashing a bunch on your computer, you can just purchase hashing that a miner has generated, and then you can send that with your email. I think we'll eventually see that, but again, I don't think the market is ready for something like that. But a site like Stacker News, certainly the user base is like receptive and ready for something like that.
That's great. Well, Keyan, thanks so much, for coming on today. I want you to be able to plug away where people can find Stacker News. Probably they'll find you at Stacker News, but go ahead and plug away where people can find you.
Yeah. So Stacker.News is the website, and then I'm on Twitter at Kubideh, K00BIDEH. And then Stacker.News is also on Twitter at Stacker_News. And that's really all you need. If you want to find more out about PlebLab, it's pleblab.com, and it's at PlebLab on Twitter.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on, and excited to just keep watching Stacker News grow.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. Great convo.
Yeah, you too. That was such an awesome conversation. It's really fun to see Keyan and the work that he and his co-founders at PlebLab are doing and to accelerate Bitcoin adoption. And I can't get over how important this idea is of returning control and value back to the people who create the value on social media platforms. That is the truly tide-changing concept. To quote his words going back to Twitter, we all create an incredible amount of value on Twitter and we can't take it with us. But you add in Bitcoin and Lightning, and now all of a sudden, if that becomes the micro in-house economy, then we actually get to take that with us as well, or use it to continue to pour back in if that's what we choose. But the idea is value for value, except in the social space. And so I've been a huge recipient of value for value on the value for value apps on podcasting 2.0, and that's super exciting. But then you start incorporating that into the social media aspect, which in a lot of ways becomes the advertising board for your podcast. And now all of a sudden you have this, as he calls it, energy token, Bitcoin on Lightning, that you can take and use in all of your different web contexts. And so the idea of Web3 being you own the value and you can take it wherever you want on the web, that is the tide-changing concept, and it stands in stark contrast to what others might consider Web3. And so, excited for that, and thank you so much for showing up, taking a look. If you liked this session, like, subscribe, stream stats. That is how I keep the show going, is, if you find value from a conversation that I've had, streaming value in return would be a much appreciated gesture. And so thanks again for showing up. Until next time, stay well.